If you pick up my short story collections, like I said, they are wild and weird, and it's really interesting. I remember meeting a reader once who said to me, I read your first collection and I didn't realize that you were a black woman, which I thought was such an interesting thing to say and told me a lot about expectations around who's expected to write what, and it's really interesting.
Everybody, welcome to this exciting new conversation we have, and we have a very special guest today. Her name is Irenosen Okojie. She's a Nigerian-born novelist and short story writer. She's won quite a few awards, including the Betty Trask Award in the year 2016. She's a member of the Royal Society of Literature, of which she's also the vice chair. But more than that, we are here in this classroom, as you can see, after this very intense lecture we had by her, where she was basically telling us all the secrets behind what it makes what is required to become a successful writer, the journey, the things that you have to negotiate, and we're very glad to have gone through that. And I thought I would begin off the left field and ask you about the last part of your talk where you were talking about doing a festival, right? Mm-hmm. Because, we as a university are trying to look at ways in which private universities like ourselves can become genuine patrons of the arts. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we do that is by doing a literary festival. The next edition is coming up on 15 February 2025, and it is really heartening for someone like me to see a writer, because there's an image of a writer who is somewhat cynical of these activities, right? You have all the J.D. Salingers and the Don DeLillos who celebrate withdrawal from the, from this hustle and bustle of writing into a sort of solitude, whereas you have a lot of conviction about the fact that this is also part of what you do, right? So if you could tell us, how as writers we approach this process of making a community, whether it is through festivals or otherwise, while at the same time having this solitude, and what lessons you have for us on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a balance, I say. You obviously need a sensitivity as a writer and that solitude to produce the work. But in order to produce good work, you also have to be a part of the world. No man is an island. You have to be engaged. You have to interact with people, learn from people, absorb from people, be in the mix. And because I came up grassroots, like I said, I came up working in the arts scene. So for me, it's kind of integral to my existence. I've never not known anything else. I've never not known how to not be part of a writing community or how to not foster that. Because, my previous role, as I mentioned at Apples and Snakes, I was National Development Coordinator, and it was my job to go out and bring artists in and, create opportunities for them. So for me, I find it really invigorating. I love to be engaged with other artists. I love to think about ways that we can help elevate each other, help celebrate each other, help find pathways together, because otherwise, it can be really hard. It can be really lonely, and I find it not only incredibly stimulating, but incredibly galvanizing. So I love the fact that you're thinking about the university as a space to help foster that, because it's really important. How do we encourage young voices? How do we find ways to get them excited about the arts? Yeah. And I think that, things like festivals play a really big part of that. And there is so much that you can do with a festival now. It doesn't have to be a standard, typical festival. You can play around with it. You can get the students to be curators as part of it. Yeah. You can have guest curators. There's so much you can do. So for me, it's really a necessity, actually. I don't know any other way to exist. I love to produce the writing, but I also love to kind of be a part of the world, you know, and there's so much joy, I think, that you get from being part of a literary community. I certainly would not have had the confidence to write the way I write if I hadn't been seen. If I hadn't been seen by people, you know, like Bernardine Evaristo, like Sunny Singh, like Alex Wheatle, you know, these are all writers who saw me at early stages and, you know, were part of communities themselves and said, you have something, and I think you should do X, Y, and Z, and you should connect to X, Y, and Z, and you should talk to X. If I didn't have that, if I didn't put myself out there in that way, I would not have made those connections. And I would not have learnt the lessons, gotten the joys, gotten certain illuminations about the process of writing and the process of, you know, you mentioned the kind of cynical approach of writers like J.D. Salinger, etc. I'm really glad that I'm at the opposite end of that spectrum, and I'm really unabashed and unapologetic about it because, yeah, I love the idea of writing communities. What if the publishing industry was not as welcoming? You know, we could essentially find ways to still get voices out there. You know, that is the thing, you know, you want to have these communities. So, you know, perhaps, I don't know if the university has its own press. There are certain universities that do, for example, in the States. So, you know, that could be another thing. Have the festival, have a university press that publishes anthologies, or, you know, you can kind of have your own ecosystem.
Exactly.
And it can be a platform for these students and these voices that to then go on and do other things. And I think it would give so much confidence, you know, not only in terms of getting their voices out there, but giving them a sense of agency to be a part of something, you know, which is what I feel like Black to the Future did, you know, and I want to continue, you know, doing that with that festival. It's just, I was so blown away, not only by the voices of colour who came to the festival and said, this is so important that you're opening up this space, you know, but also audiences, mixed audiences who came and said, I had no idea these voices existed, and now I'm going to go and look up X, Y, Z and look up all these different references. It's actually, you've opened up a door in my head. So that is the power of literary communities. And that's what Black to the Future did. You know, we noticed that audiences kept coming back, you know, we spotted some of the same faces at different events. So you're creating a community in that way, in that vein. And yeah, that can only be a good thing for me. For me, it's like food, it's like life, you know, I cannot exist as a writer. I imagined that if I did, I personally would really struggle with that, you know, so I think it's a great thing. I was very excited to hear when you mentioned that the university was going to be putting on this festival. I think it's the right way to go, yeah.
No, that's very nice to hear, Irenosen, because you know, one of the things that we realize is because we have a MA Creative Writing program as well. Like you said that this was your job, right? So before, you know, you could take up writing in a more you know, full-time sense of the word, and I think that's something that a reality that all of us writing program students are actually confronting and accepting, because, you know, some of them, let's say for example, you know, some of them interned at a publishing house that does comics. So it's not like she got that student who is a very bright student, Shruti, it's not like she got to write the comic on day one. She was rather asked to write bylines for the comics, you know, as it will go to the stores, or maybe write you know, a small blurb about it, you know, create content around it, which, or for that matter, you know, another student of mine called Pramiti, you know, like she worked as a lifestyle journalist, you know, where she was literally going around covering all these literary festivals and other cultural festivals in the city. So, which brings me to the point you said about the ecosystem, right? So, which is young aspiring writers should find ways of somehow becoming part of this ecosystem, and then gradually find their way up, if you like, in terms of having more roles which are dedicated to writing. And that's something that, you know, I'm continuously realizing myself also. But that apart, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, you know, the whole theme of speculative fiction itself, which is something that you tackle. Because at the festival, one of the things that we are doing is kind of have speculative fiction writers from Asia or even the global South, broadly construed, and we have speculative fiction writers from Japan, from Indonesia, and so on and so forth coming in. Because this brings me to a very interesting point you made during the lecture, that there is one part of the politics of your work which is about ensuring that black writers have more space and have more voice, have more support. But at the same time, you said that there's also a way in which that shouldn't consume you entirely. There should be ways in which you should be just invited to talk about craft, right?
Yeah.
And the plot. So I think this is a very, for me, especially because, especially in the Indian context, I come from a relatively privileged background. I must tell you that, in my own journey, I used to often wonder, why is identity even an issue in the world of writing? And I used to sometimes even sneer at it. But as I realized, as I understood the world of writing as a community and all, like you said, all the gatekeeping that happens, all my prejudices have sort of melted away. But I would like you to dwell more upon how you owned up this theme of speculative fiction, because you could have done many other things, right? And number one, and how do you balance both these aspects, where you just don't want to be known as a black writer, you also want to be just known for the craft of your writing, right? So how do you combine the two? Because you have to accept that both are part of your existence and identity, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, that's exactly it. Both are part of it and both are important. And the interesting thing is, there is no way of escaping the fact that I'm a black writer. The reality is, if I pretended like I wasn't, real life would hit me over the head and let me know, through certain experiences. It's not and in some ways I kind of embrace that, because I do think that there is power in being able to define what that is to you. So in terms of my writing, I see that there is richness in black storytelling, there is boldness, there is innovation, there is history, there is culture, there is so much, and I'm incredibly proud of that. But at the same time, it's not like I'm always consciously writing thinking I have to explore the black identity. It's just that some of my characters happen to be black. If you pick up my short story collection, like I said, they are wild and weird. And it's really interesting. I remember meeting a reader once who said to me, I read your first collection and I didn't realize that you were a black woman, which I thought was such an interesting thing to say, and told me a lot about expectations around who's expected to write what, and it's really interesting. And yeah, I can understand, sometimes people can feel that it's a burden, that actually I don't want to be just solely defined by identity. But the truth and the reality is, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. It's really that. Like I said, I embrace that identity, but I don't embrace the sort of negative connotations that structural systems want to impose on me as a black woman, to tell me that I am less than, that I am not as talented, that my voice doesn't matter. I reject all of that. And I push back against all of that with my writing, But similarly, like I said to you, I also love to be asked about all sorts of things. I love to be asked about the fact that I like world cinema, and that I can talk about Polish directors, and I can talk about, Argentinian directors and American directors, and, all kinds of things. I love to talk about art across the board, So my references are expansive, Yes, I talk about blackness, but I also talk about all kinds of references. And you can see that in the work too. So, it's a balancing act, like you said. It's about, speaking to those things, but not letting it solely define you. And I think, anybody who picked up my body of work, I have 4 books now, and I've been in, I would say, over 13, 14 anthologies. It's so expansive, it's so eclectic, it's so varied. There is no way that if you are of a certain intellect, you can read that stuff and just try and define that person by one thing, you know. But in terms of Black to the Future and why I was very conscious in my choice in calling it that. I could have called it something else. I could have called it something less, you know, political, less specific, more accessible. Like I said, in the UK, I have felt that there was not support of Black experimental voices. And I really wanted to speak to that and create a space that spoke to that. So it's balancing everything, you know. It's a juggling act.
Yeah. And I think I want to also like maybe talk about the fact that you spoke about your love for art and cinema. I think that's something I think our students have still to accept and embrace even more, because you know we have a very vibrant film club which does very good world cinema every week, but it's a club that is you know very sparsely attended because you know it's I think people are not able to see the way in which the worlds of art, cinema and fiction sort of truly feed each other, right? And like you said, it could be imagery, it could be characters, or whatever you like. Absolutely. Right? So I think, would you say that your experience of world cinema was kind of essential to, how to say, fueling your drive for you know for speculative fiction specifically, because insofar as cinema is like that the epitome of the imagination, you know, inherently, like in terms of how it speaks about our dreams, our nightmares, or you know the fantasies that can actually be seen right in cinema, like a fantastic image can come to life. So would you say that it had an impact like that?
Oh, I certainly feel like it did. I certainly feel that it gave me confidence in terms of translating some of that energy onto the page, because obviously with film you have much less time. So it's about the storytelling. How do you do the story with much less time? So for me, there was a direct connection in terms of short stories. And like I said, I was working on short stories at a particular time. So watching films, watching world cinema, for me, it was really easy to see the connection. It was not a thing of having to like force myself. No, it's all storytelling and it's all feeding the imagination. I remember watching David Lynch, who I'm a massive fan of, his films, you know, Blue Velvet, Eraserhead, which is crazy. And I was just like, this is nuts, but in a really good way. And that definitely spoke to some of the feverishness and some of the darkness in Speak Gigantular, my collection. So I could see it manifesting and I could see it fueling me, you know, because sometimes you're reading fiction, which is great and speaks to you in a particular way, but film also does that in a different way. But it's all connected. Art also does that in a different way. But again, it's all connected because art, you know, you don't get context. You have to create that context for yourself in a way, and that also allows you to stretch your storytelling muscles. Like, what is the artist's intention? You know, there's a South African artist called Zanele Mahale who is incredible, and she was showing at Tate Britain a couple of years ago, and she had this like extensive exhibition of kind of different things, that different projects that she'd worked on. And I guarantee you, had I not known it was her, each one felt like it was a different artist. I was just like, how is this come from the same person? You know, that kind of blew my mind. So things like that really excite me. How are you able to kind of sit in between genres and in between mediums and in between spaces, you know? So for me, it all kind of helps with that. It all sort of feeds the imagination. And I got so much from film, like I said, when I was finding my voice, like, how do I create a voice that stands, an authorial voice that is distinctive, that stands out? You know, so I was always looking to alternative spaces. I was always looking at alternative films, world cinema. You know, I remember watching the films of Spike Lee, you know, as a teenager, and, you know, in my early 20s, watching She's Got to Have It, which is actually a groundbreaking film. You know, it's a film about a young black woman, you know, living in New York, and she has 3 different lovers, and she's an artist. And that's radical to see on cinema. You don't see films like that, exploring the black female experience in that way, and that really inspired me, like the complexity of it and the fact that it was just it was so bold in its intention, So yeah, I think there's a lot to draw from different mediums, and I think smart creators, smart storytellers do that. You learn, you're like a sponge. You know what I mean? You watch things that inspire you. You look at, okay, the director's done this with this story. I would never have gone in that direction, but that's given me an idea for what I could do with it. So for me, it's also about filling the gaps. How can I turn this on its head? If I'm looking at a particular subject matter and reading work around that subject matter or watching films around that subject matter, I'm always looking at what the gaps are. What haven't they done? You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah. In fact, now your very passionate advocacy of watching cinema has got me all inspired to see David Lynch again. But that one of the things that I want to sort of turn this into a self-reflexive mode, so to speak. And when we look how talking about cinema and art can maybe eventually nudge you to actually pick up a book, right? So in this day and age, because we are doing a podcast right now, one of my curiosities is in what ways have you embraced this digital medium? Maybe you could tell us both in terms of how you've used it to promote or popularize your work, but also if there are interesting conversations or podcasts or which you discovered on the internet, is that a medium which you look towards, where you look at the internet and you want to hear other writers talking? Is that a thing?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm a geek, so I'm always Googling. If I hear about something or I see someone talk, I want to find out more about them. So I immediately go to the internet, Google them, watch their talks, if they've written books, find out about their books, fall down a rabbit hole, so to speak. So the internet, I think, has been very useful for authors, for writers, for creators. Twitter in its early iteration, not so much now, it's kind of fallen off somewhat, Elon Musk, I'm just saying no more. But in its early iteration, it was, a really exciting space to be. And actually, if you were a writer, it kind of cut out that process where you felt like the industry wasn't accessible. You could connect with editors and agents you could follow them and they'd follow you back, and suddenly you could have a conversation, And also, being a space to amplify important issues around things that were happening in the industry. So writers talking about pay, for example. I remember 2 years ago, there was this whole conversation called Publishing Paid Me, which was actually really eye-opening in terms of the contrast between what writers of color earn and what white writers earn. So people were saying what their deals were online, on Twitter, hashtag Publishing Paid Me, and it was fascinating to see who got what for a similar title. But it also meant that actually you could then go away, certainly as writers of color, to advocate for yourselves, in a way that was, I think, important. So, there are all kinds of conversations that happen around the industry, around gatekeeping in the industry, putting pressure on gatekeepers online as well, because they watch these conversations, and journalists who cover the industry will probably, go and write about it in the bookseller or etc. So it is a really important space, and I think a lot of writers have sort of embraced it in that sense. It can also be addictive and stop you from writing too, if you don't manage your time carefully. So that is the balance, I think, to not just completely let it be all-consuming, because it can be that. But one of the things I love to do, because I love film, is I often watch people talk about their art. I do a lot of moderating as well, so I moderate events a lot in the UK. With other artists and other writers. So I love conversation, it's fascinating. So I love to watch artists talk about their process, talk about their work. And that's something that I do. I would just Google people that I'm interested in and hear them talk maybe at a round table about a specific theme or subject matter, and just listen to language and how they use language to articulate their process. You know, because it's all fascinating.
Yeah, I think for all the wisdom that you have given us, our conversation wouldn't be complete, and without asking you, you know, how we could distill some of this wisdom into things we could actually implement in our MA writing program. Like, I know that since you're part of the literary ecosystem in Britain, so you would have some exposure to how writing programs work, and you must have you know, been to those programs also to speak and everything. So given all this exposure that you've had, what ways you think we could reimagine writing programs today? Like, is there something that occurs to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always about keeping your ear on the ground, and if you are given the space to change things a little bit, use that opportunity. So, for example, bring the industry to the students so that from an early iteration and an early time, they have those connections, you know. Get agents to come and speak to your students, get editors to come and speak. They will come as well. They won't say no, they will come. Get independent editors. Let them experience the broad spectrum of the industry so that, in a sense, you're debunking that for them so that they're not terrified going out there into the world. I'm not sure that loads of MA programs do that. You know, they do the program, but they don't give the students access. And I think that's the difference, I think, to kind of update these programs is how do we create access? How do we debunk the more difficult parts of the industries? And who are the people in the industry who want to do that? You know, find them and bring them on board, get them to be, you know, connected to the program, get them to, if they're running, because that's happening a lot, there are publishing programs where they're looking for voices to come on those programs. They may find them on MA programs, you know, they may find them through open calls or submissions, but the point is you are kind of the connector, and I think that you can do that, you know. I think that there are ways to sort of reimagine it. Having a festival, you know, that's so cool to have that. Having an anthology, you know, potentially where, you know, the students can contribute and have that as a takeaway, you know, something to be proud of, to say, oh, I wrote this during my MA program, and, you know, as a result of this gave me confidence and I want to write more work. So there are things that can be done, I think. There are practical things that can be done to sort of, you know, galvanize these programs a bit. And yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to people in the industry. I also think, you know, some of those people, some of those gatekeepers or people operating within those structures also want to like shake up how they operate. You know, I've met people certainly in the UK who will go out to things like visiting MA programs or go out to open word nights, open mic nights to kind of find exciting new voices. I remember when I was sort of coming up, I did a night called Brixton Book Jam, and I didn't know then, but the editor of The Observer, which is a big paper in the UK, saw me read at that event, and then about a month later he got in touch with my agent and said, I saw Irenosen read at Brixton and I really, really liked her. Would she be open to write columns for The Observer? That's how I started writing for them, just because, you know, this gatekeeper came to just a regular open mic night and was able to kind of see voices that he liked and then gave them space, you know. So that's how you can kind of shake things up. It's like you can bring people to the students so that they have that access.
Thanks, Irenosen, so much for articulating all this wisdom so neatly for us. Now the onus is on us, especially our students, to make the most of this, you know. But it's been a real privilege to, you know, have a writer who is truly willing to let everybody behind the scenes and say that, look, here it is, do what you want. But thank you so much for being so open and transparent about the process. It's a real privilege, and we're really thankful for that.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved visiting and having these conversations. So yeah, thank you.